Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to one of the press conferences of this 79th edition of the Venice International Film Festival. Today we are very honored and glad to host the press conference celebrating the world premiere of Music for Black Pigeons, a film screening out of competition, which is the latest film by Jürgen Leth together with Andreas Kofod. I would like to introduce the talents present here today at the press conference, starting from my extreme left with the producer, Emil Hertling-Peronard. Continuing to my direct left with the editor, Adam Nielsen. And then to Adam Jandrup, the cinematographer of the film. Okay, sorry, I have a different... Sorry, I have a different place in here. Well, okay, in the middle we have the protagonist of the film, Jakob Rowe. And to his right, one of the two directors, Andreas Kofod. And to his left, Jürgen Leth. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today and for sharing your wonderful film with us and with the audiences of the festival. As I said earlier, we are very glad and very honored to host this premiere. I would like to start the Q&A, the conference, by asking the two directors a little bit more about how this collaboration happened. This is a project that took many years to happen, to take the shape that he finally has on the screen today, and we would like to know a little bit more of how you started the project and how you met and how you created this film together. Thank you so much.
Yes. In a way, it started already back in 2008. I was in New York and I was shooting a recording session that Jacob had with his record called Balladeering. And I knew that Jürgen was in town, so I wrote an email to Jürgen and asked if he wanted to stop by the studio. It was in the legendary Avatar studio. And I knew that Jürgen was a big jazz fan. So Jürgen came by one day and he spent a few hours with us there, and he met Jacob for the first time. He also met his old hero, Lee Konitz, one of the other musicians. And then, then we finished that film that we did back then, and then in 2015 we went on a tour. We started talking about making a jazz film, so we went on a tour with Jakob and some of the other musicians. And we went to Greenland, Iceland, Faroe Islands, and shot a lot of beautiful scenes there. And then later on we started working with Adam, the editor, and we started to figure out what the shape of the film could be.
I think the important thing is that this happens like a little bit by coincidence. We meet each other, we like what's happening, we try to find a way to tell about it. That's it. That's the simple structure of a starting project. We are interested in Jakob's music, we are enthusiastic about the participants, especially some of my heroes from when I was a jazz critic. Okay, can you hear now? Yeah. It was great for me to meet Lee Konitz in a studio. I mean, I wrote about him in the early 60s many times. I wrote many articles about him. I liked him. He's one of my heroes. I was a jazz critic before I became a filmmaker. So this made a lot of sense for me to, and my first film was a film about a jazz musician, about Bud Powell from '63. That's my first film. So I felt it's a return to an early love and a passion. And this was a great feeling. And we became friends all over, and we liked what was happening. It was so alive, everything. So far that.
Still friends.
Yeah. Still friends.
I have a question for Jacob. Jacob, you are, let's say, the subject of the film, the protagonist, or the character that somehow brings together several of the events and the moments that the film shares with us. How was it for you to be followed by these filmmakers for this long stretch of time and becoming, as Jürgen said, a friend and sharing so much of your life and the life of your own friends and the artistic collaborators that you spend time with?
Yeah, it was. I mean, the actual camera, like the filming and stuff, was a little bit difficult sometimes. But I was very grateful, of course, that all these different meetings I had with my music and my friends and collaborators were captured, not just on tape, but also on film. So it's been a really nice ride somehow, and it feels good also that we sort of came to a conclusion with all the material somehow. There's so many of my friends who are not here anymore, which are in the film, many musical meetings that are not on record but are in the film also, that I'm really happy about. And to me, it's like the music, the film does not give you any answer really about what music is, because it's such a subjective thing in a way. And I think my music is, I'm always trying to let the music sort of guide its own way in a way. I think that's, I'm giving a lot of freedom to my musicians, and somehow the movie reflects that in a really beautiful way. I think it goes its own ways, and it doesn't really, reveal the magic of music. It just shows you all these human beings that are living with music, and so I can see myself in that sort of thing, which I'm really grateful for.
Thank you. Then I would like to move on to Emil with a question from the producing side. As mentioned earlier, this is a project that took a long time to make. I would like to know when you entered the project, if you were there from the beginning, or if you became a producer of this something that was building throughout the years, and what was your contribution in facilitating the production of something that, has such quality of depicting life as it unfolds through the years. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, every film is a journey, and I think this one has been a particularly long and winding one. I was involved since 2014, and I knew Andreas through a common friend back then. And we had this opportunity to film this tour of Jacob's music in the Nordic countries. And I'm from Greenland, and it was just like a great opportunity to bring this music that I loved home in a way. And then at the same time, having like Jürgen, who was like a huge idol of mine, to do this with us. And I was just like, okay, we're gonna do this, and we don't have any money, but we're just gonna do it and jump out into it. And it's Jürgen, so it's gonna be super easy to finance. And then, like 7 years later, no money, nothing. It was really difficult until I think some things happen that you can just not foresee in these kinds of processes. One thing was that Adam came on board, and we kind of had a process of reframing and reformulating the project a little bit. And then we had a commissioning editor at the Danish Film Institute that just completely fell in love with the project and really saw it for what it could become. So Frank Poulsen was kind of instrumental in giving us the resources that we needed. But I think it was also like a process of figuring out, like with music, what this film really was. And Andreas and Jürgen, and we kept like filming for years without really having a plan. And I felt that it for the last year or so, where we edited the film and everything like actually came together quite quickly, that it was a bit of a musical process where you know, what we have filmed and what we are editing is actually the same thing that we're doing now in the editing room, like putting pieces together and seeing what they can do, and then suddenly there's this beautiful music coming out of the screen. And I think, I mean, I still owe so much money from making this film, but it will be fine because it's beautiful.
Good luck with that. Thank you, Emil. And thank you also for mentioning the editing process, because indeed the next question is about that. And I would like to ask Adam how it was to work with this material. I guess there was a lot of material that was collected through the years. But then when we watched the film, we have an incredible feeling of cohesiveness and a very, very specific way of flowing, especially when it comes to the moments of these musical meetings, the creation side. And yeah, it feels like it's a very, very, very precise job. Emil was now mentioning that actually it was made very quickly, so I would like to ask you a little bit more of insight on how the process was. Thank you.
Well, I don't really know what to say because it was just very unproblematic. And there was so much love in the editing room, and it was kind of like what I love about Jakob's music is he really gives room for all his musicians, and this also felt kind of like that. Everybody had room to speak, so it just became very natural, and I don't know, it wasn't hard at all. It was such a joy editing this film, and everything just came together without really thinking about it, just listening to your heart in a way, just feeling your way through. I don't know what to say other than that.
I guess that really translates well into the film. And regarding the way we experience the film, I have a question going back to Andreas and Jürgen. What really strikes the viewer when watching the film and when the film unfolds, the very first moment when the music comes in, it really feels like the camera, the editing, the lights, everything is in sync with it. I thought the film was a fantastic example of, masterful example of filming music as it happens, as a performance happens. So I was really wondering how you did that, because, is it really calculated, everything was designed in advance, or it was also a jazz session as well, like how the camera moves, how the lights are on the musicians, how the focus changes, because it's really incredible. Thank you.
The plot is the story. The plot of the film became the process of creating. That's wonderful for us, because that was an experience, a live experience, a real experience. I mean, the story comes out of itself, of very creative people who meet. That's wonderful, and we just have to, in a way, to observe the whole flow of ideas of what to do next, and to see the stories, see the people working. I love the film because it has a documentary, a real documentary sense of finding out how things are created. I like that.
Yeah, I think most of the scenes, the musical scenes, they were not planned at all. But it's about capturing the moment, because we know that these musicians, they only do 1 or 2 takes of each song. So you can't try out a lot of different things. You have to be there when they play it for the first time. So I think that gives you some kind of energy that you need to capture the moment right now. And I think that's the beauty of documentary film, that you cannot do one more take. You cannot ask the musicians to do the same thing again. It's impossible. So you also have to embrace all the mistakes and the errors, and that's a part of both that kind of music, but also the way we make films.
Earlier, I forgot to mention that, of course, the session is open to questions from the floor. If anybody has a question, you're more than welcome to ask in English or Italian. if there is no question from the audience, I will go on. One of the other parts of the film, I mean, of course, there are these wonderful rehearsals, performances that are filmed, but another part of the film is this presentation of the characters who are talking about themselves. But what is really powerful about these moments is the fact that this device escapes from the banality of a simple talking head. I really thought that the bits of these, let's call them interviews, are chosen with a very intent view on the inside of the characters. I mean, these little bits really convey something about these artists, which goes beyond the simple description of their artistry and really captures their humanity. So I wanted to ask you how you did that. I mean, were there much longer interviews with very, very complex questions, or really you went for these specific questions? I'm just curious to know how that came about. Thank you so much.
Of course, we chose who we thought we would like to hear explain their art, and they all delivered fantastic things, like Bill Frisell, who's a very straightforward and sweet person who tells the love of how he finds to be with Lee Konitz, his old colleague. And of course, I'm very much in love with Thomas Morgan, who's explaining what he's doing, how his relation to creativity is. And you know, you have to wait for his answer for a long time. And that part of the film is definitely, for me, electric. The way of waiting for his answer. You can see that he's working on it, but you can't hear anything until long time after. I like the piece of silence that's in the middle of that film, with that scene. I like it very much. It's like Warholian in a way, inspired by some of my other work with Warhol, etc. So I like that very much. And we're just waiting to have them say something. And it's not a given thing what they're saying. It's part of the creative process, what they're saying about their own contribution.
Andreas, do you want to add anything on this?
Yeah, I think we had a lot of trust from the musicians, and I think it came from Jakob, because he was so close to them, and in a way they just let us in, and I think that trust created a room for reflection. So it became something different than a regular interview, and I think we had lots of time and patience. We didn't have expectations for specific answers. We were just letting the time flow. And I think Jürgen managed to create like a very comfortable and also serious atmosphere around this. That can we describe music? Is it possible at all? And then this feeling of approaching something that might not be possible to put words to. I think that creates like a certain feeling throughout the film.
I'd like to add that when we're touring, nobody's talking about music. Every night when we've played a concert, the last thing we talk about is the music. And then the next day we're traveling, and then we play a concert again, and the music is all that time developing in each musician's mind, but nobody's talking about it. And I would never ask anybody to do something differently. But if that person might want to do something differently, that's fine with me. But so the music is developing, but there's no words involved. So I wasn't surprised when I saw the interviews that many of my friends were a little bit like, how are we going to put into words what music is? Because it's such a difficult thing to talk about. it's much easier to just pick up an instrument and play, and then we know between ourselves that this was good. There was something here that was, that somehow contributed to a tiny little beautiful thing, which is, what we do, I think. But
Well, Jacob, I would like to, since you were talking about this, and Andres was just mentioning the question about filming music, and it seems to me that you have already watched the film, or at least you've seen parts of it. So I was really wondering how you feel about it, how you feel about the way it depicts music and depicts your professional life, as well as your personal relationships with these other musicians, because the film gets also very emotional and very personal and human. Did you find yourself in the film, and did you find your art in the film as well, represented within cinema in a good way?
Definitely. I mean, first of all, I somehow had to pinch my arm, like watching it, all of these incredible human beings, like the whole cast of people, and they were all, friends of mine that I've been working with for 14 years. So sometimes I forget that, because I constantly try to find new sounds and new collaborations and new contrasts between musicians and people. So it was really overwhelming to see. And also, of course, to work with Andreas and Jørgen, who are my great heroes, both of them. So, I mean, it's quite a journey somehow. But for me, I think the most important thing is that it's not a portrait about me. It's like when I play music, I try to give musicians complete freedom. And I think I do have an aesthetic sense, of course, which I try to, which comes out in my compositions and also in my choice of people that I'm working with. And then I give them freedom. And I have maybe a little bit of written material that is only there to sort of ignite. This is it, and then the music will take off, and it's gonna go its own ways. And how do you show that on film in a way? Which that was one thing that I was curious about, or if it was even possible. But I really think that watching it now, it sort of reflects my own way of thinking about music. That it's not about any of the characters. It's about life in a way somehow. I don't know. It's and everybody who's been involved in the process. Now you talked about the filming and how to capture it. And I mean, Adam, who's sitting down there, he did an incredibly beautiful job, I think, in terms of preparing for these moments also, so that they also look the way they do. I mean, it's so everybody. I mean, and Adam, the way there's been editing and putting things together, there's been freedom all in all the different aspects of the film, I think, which is something I really enjoy. So.
And I have one last question, which is directed to Adam, but actually it's also for Andreas and Jørgen, because regarding the emotional structure of the film, it's unfolding. I found the very ending, and of course, if people haven't seen the film, I don't want to spoil it, but the very ending section of the film, incredibly powerful in the way it edits back and forth through the images and sound from the present to the past, and then again to another present. And, you know, I don't want to reveal too much, but it's an incredibly good way of presenting emotional and factual events unfolding. So I wanted to ask you how this conception of the all-ending part of the film came about, and if it was your own idea, how do you converse and discuss about it? Thank you.
Well, actually, it was a film without saying too much. There's a lot of people who passes away during the filming of this film. So we didn't really want to make it very melancholic or very sad. So we had to find a way to make it beautifully sad without being too sad. It's a film that should make you happy, not a film that should make you sad. So we kind of played around with the Jørgen's first film, Stop for Bud, with Bud Powell. He's like walking around in Copenhagen and pigeons flying around and stuff like that. So it was kind of a homage to Jørgen's first film from 60 years ago, kind of woven into a sort of homage to the musicians also. But we kind of just like played around with it until it felt the right way, and it wasn't too sad or too happy.
I think the key word you mentioned is unfolding, because that's about the film. It's unfolding while we are doing it, and that's immensely intriguing and exciting and inspiring, that things are happening when we are seeing it. So it's not it's less planning than gifts from coincidence. So I believe very much in happenings, in coincidences. That's an inspiring factor, that you don't force it, and that's the whole atmosphere and soul of the music of Jakob and these wonderful musicians that he invited in. So he invited people in to the film in the same moment as he invites them into the music. That's the key to understanding this film. It's a film about creative process. That's the shortest description of the film.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time. I would like to thank Jørgen Leth, Andreas Kofod, and the whole team of Music for Black Pigeons, and of course all the journalists who stayed for the press conference. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Buongiorno e grazie di essere venuti a questa conferenza stampa del nostro film in concorso di The Eternal Daughter. Prima di cominciare presento gli ospiti al tavolo a partire dalla destra in fondo, è l'attrice Tilda Swinton, e la regista del film Joanna Hogg. I'm going to start with a very simple question to Joanna. Joanna, what led you to this ghost story? I think it started as something in 2008 that you were working as was a naturalistic piece, and then you brought in the supernatural dimension.
I mean, I've always been interested in the supernatural, and in fact, before I made the souvenirs, I was thinking of making a ghost story, and then after the souvenirs. I was thinking a lot about ghosts. I think we were all thinking about ghosts actually in 2020. And it came, and then I thought again of this story of a mother and daughter that I'd wanted to make in 2008. And the two just came together. Now I can't separate them. I don't really know how they came together. But I also read some ghost stories again in that same year before shooting the film. And one was Kipling's They, which was the first time I'd read a ghost story, a short ghost story that moved me to tears. So there was something about an emotional landscape and a ghostly one that connected.
There's a question there.
Thank you both. Wonderful film last night. I saw it twice. Question about this idea of the intergenerational nature of playing both parts and writing it, I assume, for the same actress to play the same parts, and the fact that it was filmed during COVID, a time where like one generation was being affected more than any other, and if that played some sort of role in the planning or the inspiration for you, Ms. Swinton.
That's really, I'm very grateful to you for pinpointing that, because that was a very early seed in the ground for us. When Joanna and I worked together on the souvenirs, in which, as you may or may not know, this person, I don't like to speak of characters, but this person, Julie, who happened to be played by my own daughter, I had her mother, Rosalind, who I played. And even though those films are very much Julie's adventure, Julie's journey and her story, Joanna and I spoke a lot during those years about our interest in this particular generation leap or chasm even between mothers of our mother's generation and women of our age. And it was particularly interesting to us because I now have a daughter of pretty much the same age as we were when the story of the souvenir was played out about that moment. And we noticed how different the relationship is between mothers of my age, not generally, but very often between mothers of my age and daughters of my daughter's age, and daughters of our age and our mothers. And we became very interested in that. And we started to talk about this story, about Rosalind older and Julie older. And for a while, we did consider, we always thought that I would play Julie. And we talked for a while about an older performer playing the mother. But somehow, this very strange impulse overtook us. And of course, now you've seen the film, and you've seen it twice. Amazing. Until this morning, we'd never met anybody who'd seen the film, so we're a little in awe. Because nobody saw this film. There's not even a trailer or a poster or anything, so it comes in our hands like a little sort of pocket of sand. But it makes us actually want to hear from you. We really want to hear from you. We don't really want to talk at all. But this idea of them both being played by the same person, of course, now we see makes it an entirely different film. Because it is, without giving too much away, as I hope you won't, it's about something completely different and more profound, and about the entanglement of mother and daughter, and how do we separate? How much of our mother is our projection, How much of our daughter is our projection? This whole question then became alive for us. And so once we'd had this idea, we didn't look back.
As a follow-up, how do you shoot, those really intimate, and how do you act those really intimate scenes where the two of them are talking to each other? I mean, they're so close, and there's got to be a way. How did you do it?
Well, the simplicity of what's presented belies actually the complexity of how we made the film. And I wanted to make the film using the same process I've used for all my films, which is of an improvisatory nature. So I wanted to keep to that. But how the hell do you do that with a film where my friend is playing two people? And so my first thought was I don't want any gimmicks. I want to put the camera in front of each of the Rosalind and Julie and not have to worry about technicalities. I think I'm not a very technical director. I'm interested in the world in front of me. And so to break it down very briefly, Tilda and I would have a conversation. She would play Rosalind, say, and I would play Julie. And we would obviously not film myself, but we would be filming Tilda as the other character. And then that would set a shape for the scene, and then Tilda was then on her own from then on. But the conversations we had as these two people were really conversations we couldn't have had unless we had known each other for 50 years. So it meant we could go much deeper into the story and the ideas, and it became something very, symbiotic and very natural. But just to say that it seems very simple, but there was a lot of work, an incredible crew around us who were supporting this way of working.
The interesting thing is, and just to be clear about it, there is no script. These are improvised. I can't even call them performances because none of us, including the wonderful Carly, who's with us in the film, one of the few other people in the film, doesn't perform, but responds, because what comes out of her mouth is what she, in a way as a writer, is bringing. And that's a very particular, and may I say, in my opinion, glorious way of working, because it means that you can go any which way. You can follow a little trail of breadcrumbs over this way. I mean, in the Rosalind-Julie dialogue, we had to remember what those breadcrumbs were because we had to maybe follow them the next day or later in the same day on the other side. But it was having got over the incredible leap of faith that Joanna, as a director, I mean, it's inspired to have this decision, to have no over-the-shoulders, to have no paraphernalia, no doubles, no sort of somebody else with a similar wig, none of that. Just this person and then this person. It's a very brave and inspired artistic choice, and not only on her behalf, but the team. I mean, Ed Rutherford, who's the extraordinary director of photography, just committed to that and lit it in such a way that, for my money, you don't question it after, and we're so used in the lexicon of filmmaking, we're so used to the whole vernacular of the over-the-shoulder, but you don't miss it. This is the miraculous thing about what Joanna has achieved, I think.
But talking of bravery, the bravery is so much Tilda's bravery because she's not even playing these two parts with different voices. It's the same voice. We decided not to give Rosalind a particular way of speaking, and anyone who's seen the film will understand why that is, in fact. But we all plunged into something very dark and deep, and hopefully there's some joy in there somewhere.
I think there's a question there.
Eccomi qua. Lei paragona questa storia al cubo di... Lei paragona questa storia al cubo di Rubik. Volevo sapere, forse perché rimanda all'idea del rompicapo o una certa atmosfera ipnotica, però volevo una sua riflessione su questo, questa storia e il cubo di Rubik. nelle note. Ecco, ho letto questo suo paragone.
Who mentioned the Rubik's Cube? Did I? Oh, Lord. I feared as much. I suppose what I meant by that was that the satisfaction is deferred, that there's that immersion in the atmosphere and the acknowledgement, this is what we were aiming for, and only you can tell us if we managed to pull it off, but there's that immersion in the adventure and the knowing that it's not going to make sense for a while. I mean, we hope it makes sense at the end, but that we didn't want it to make sense too early, and we needed to keep, as with the Rubik's Cube, and my son is much better at Rubik's Cubes than I, but the commitment to not fixing too early one side, just working it up, and trusting that at the last minute, the pattern will show. I suppose that's what I meant. And that's, again, technically, in terms of storytelling, because this is the other achievement of the great Joanna Hogg, there was no screenplay for her to hone and make into some kind of architectural scaffolding. There was a sort of semi-ghost scaffolding, like made of wood or paper. But she was constantly inventing, every day, every scene, every minute, and in a way setting all these hairs running, but not chasing them down too soon. And that's, again, an extraordinary feat for a filmmaker to have the nerve to throw it over and not bring it in too soon. Maybe that's what I meant.
But I think what tends to get forgotten in the process of how I make a film is that I do write, and it takes me a long time. It takes me sometimes months or a year. And with this particular story, I've been chewing since 2008, however long that is. I've been thinking about how do I make a film about the relationship that I have with my mother. And guilt stopped me for many years doing that. I still feel guilty. I feel guilty sitting here, having just made this film. My mother's not around any longer. I feel sad that she won't see it, but I also, maybe I'm relieved in a way that she won't. But it's, these ideas get chewed and chewed, but then when we start shooting, I let everything go. I'm not interested in that thing that I wrote. It's the interest or the excitement is day to day what's going to happen and not knowing what's going to happen. So this unknowingness really formed how we worked on The Eternal Daughter.
Which makes the film, and then I'll get to you, even more surprising. I mean, when I saw it, it was because it's a perfect British ghost story. It's like, it's like the 5-7 pages thing that you read and then you stop and you say, wow. So is that sense of control, it's a sense of complete control of of it, which is lovely in the film.
Well, it reminds me that actually when I was writing the story, I decided that I would write a really good ghost story. So I wasn't thinking of a script or even of the film. I was just thinking, what makes a good ghost story? So that's actually how it started life. I wouldn't show it to anybody now. But.
There's a question there.
Hi, thank you very much for your beautiful movie. I loved every minute of the mystery and intimacy of it, and because not everyone has kids and daughters, but everyone has mother. And I'm just wondering, during the performance, who you were identified more with the role of mother or daughter? So, and thank you very much. I love your colors.
Oh, thank you very much. My honor to wear half of the Ukrainian flag. It's a really, really interesting question, and I don't really have an answer. I'm going to be disappointing and say both. But that's maybe the point, is that it is possible to identify with both. I mean, that's in a way, for those of us who've seen the film and know the story, that's the point, that Julie also is putting herself in Rosalind's shoes. Joanna and I have spoken for 50 years about our mothers, and neither of our mothers are with us anymore. My mother moved on earlier than shooting this film, and Joanna and I had talked a lot about the entanglement of a mother and a daughter, even after the mother has left, and the projections involved. So I would say, making the film was partly an exercise in making friends with projection, not being frightened of it, not being frightened of being haunted, and also acknowledging that just because someone exits the building, the conversation can continue. It doesn't have to end. And in amongst all the grief, because the film is about grief, one doesn't have to grieve that. One doesn't have to grieve the connection and the understanding and the nourishment from that conversation.
I think there was a question there.
Salve, Caprara alla stampa. Volevo chiedere questo a Tilda Swinton, continua a stupirci ogni volta con le sue prove che sono sempre di grande, enorme trasformazione, con le sue prove che come questa è veramente meravigliosa. Io volevo chiederle che cosa cerca, soprattutto in questo momento, in questa fase del suo lavoro e della sua carriera, che cosa la interessa, che cosa la sfida di più.
Thank you. As ever, I am looking for fellowship. This is how I started making films. And I've said many times, maybe even in this room, that my drug of choice being fellowship started with my relationship with Derek Jarman, with whom I worked for 9 years, over 7 films. But truly, the first film that I ever made was with Joanna Hogg. I made her graduation film with her. And in fact, even before that, we made a film that we haven't even completed when we were teenagers. This knowledge of the joy of, or rather, it's really, for me, the secret of working with people one loves. That's what I'm looking for. But beyond that, right now, I can say that the last film that I presented last year was a film that I made with my friend Apichatpong Ethical Memoria. And this film, my work with Joanna, my work with Joey, as we know him, is in many ways a new direction for me. To be very practical about it, I had children, and at a certain point, I knew that I didn't want to be traveling the world. I wanted to be at home. And when you, what they call lead a film, it means that you are entirely immersed for about 6 months. And so for several years, I knew that I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be at home with my children. But now they've left. And so I can immerse again. And so I would say, in answer to your question, this immersion, this deep relationship with filmmakers, colleagues, and friends that I truly love, Apichatpong and Joanna, it's a new wind. I won't say a second wind, we'll call it a 6th wind for me. And I'm really happy that you asked that question so that I could say it.
There's a question here.
Hello, Tilda and Johnson.
Hello.
This is Phoenix New Media from China, and I have 2 questions. And first of all, Tilda, did you interpret these 2 persons in a synchronized way or just separately? And second question for Joanna, could you introduce more about the soundtrack? Because the music part, because some parts sound very amazing and could be an echo to the atmosphere of the whole park, of the whole work. Thank you.
The soundtrack.
The soundtrack, yes. Well, what happened was in the souvenir, I used the music of Bartók, his Bluebeard opera, and I couldn't, even actually when I was still writing, I was thinking about the music for this film. I couldn't let go of Bartók quite And then I thought about his music, music for strings and percussion. And of course, there's a piece of that, one movement that is used in The Shining. So I decided that's an absolute no-no. I'm not going to go anywhere near The Shining. I want something different. And then I found another movement also of the strings and percussion, and that is what you hear in the film. But we use that, we repeat that movement, but we use different instrumentation for it that Bartók didn't do. For example, the flute becomes a very important instrument, and Joseph Meidel, who plays Bill so beautifully, he is a flautist, and we wanted the flute. And there's something ethereal about the flute and otherworldly, so it just seemed to fit really well. So we really used, we twisted and turned the Bartók piece and use it almost like a score. And I have to say, I'm a fan of using existing music. This is nothing against contemporary composers, but there's something exciting about using a composer like Bartók. And yes, I feel an affinity with Kubrick for this use of existing music.
I know you asked me a question. I can't remember what it was.
I think he asked if you're performing synchronized or if separate, you know, the two characters.
That's a really, in a way, a tricky question. My impulse is to say separate. They were, I mean, they are linked, of course, because you've seen the film. And they're linked. This is one of the reasons why it was so important for them to have the same voice, so that was an absolute bond. But having bonded them that way, it was important for them to be very different, because they are very different. They're from different generations. They have different relationships to emotion. They have different relationship to art. I mean, Rosalind is of a generation and someone from a kind of milieu, and I know this very well. Joanna and I, we've talked many years about our mothers. They, you know, for them to have artist daughters must have been a challenge, really a challenge, because I think the idea of putting yourself out there, like we are today, with no shell, we are tortoises with no shell today. That was really transgressive, I think, for them. The idea of telling the truth, looking at very difficult and uncomfortable things, dressing up and being seen in public, all of these things were complicated for that generation of women like our mothers. And Julie is something different. She's from a different generation, and she is an artist, and she must be an artist. And the pain that Joanna expresses in this film about her guilt and shame about making any film at all, but a film about her mother, I think is really quite breathtaking, because it's absolutely true. And I know that it's true when she tells you that she feels it even now sitting here. And that makes it even more courageous, and I would suggest even more worthwhile, because evolution, right? Yeah.
We have a question here.
Hi, congratulations about the film. I would like to ask about the decision of getting one character older and older, little by little, because we see at the first time that the characters are really similar in the skin and the skin tone. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. No one's asked that yet. It was really, the idea was, and this, yes, I don't want to do any spoilers here, but it was really about what Julie perceives. And when I think about my mother, and she was alive when we shot the film, and when I was thinking about her as we were shooting, I'm not remembering, you don't remember somebody in one point in time. Mm. And when I think about my mother now, who died when she was 93, I think of her when she was in her 60s or maybe early 70s, and it was this idea of what do we see in our mind's eye, and then she starts to fade, and then there's a moment of seeing her at her real age. So it's impossible to answer, and I have just done so, but without giving too much away, so please don't print that. It's just, I think particularly with this film, more than any other film that I've made, it's nice to go into the cinema without knowing anything at all. It's a problem these days, isn't it? It's very rare that we're innocent when we go to see a film, and I think this one would be nice.
Qui, nella prima fila.
Hello, first, thanks for the beautiful film. It's haunting in a very psychological, deep way. My question is about, actually what John said, I don't want to spoil it, but that moment closer to the end, during the mother's birthday, where the sort of reveal happens, if it was somehow planned earlier, or if it was brought on the spot, so as you said, in the process. If the whole story for you both were sort of therapy, so if it had a therapeutical effect, on your own life, on your relationship with parents and children. And the final thing, thank you very much for support of Ukraine. I'm from Ukrainian journal, and it's very important for us. Thank you.
My honor. It wasn't planned.
No.
It wasn't planned, and it was when we were editing the film, the idea of that, I won't say what it is, but that thing happening, that moment in the film. Actually, it's always the way with films, when you're putting them together, there are things that get left behind, there are ideas that you have and you change, and the edit was a very, I was going to say very emotional experience. The whole thing was a very emotional experience, but it was a very complex one of trying things out and moving things around, and I worked with a really wonderful editor called Helen Lefebvre, and she has edited all my films, and she incredible sleight of hand and cleverness in constructing this story. So things changed, and then it became very clear that that thing should happen at that point in time, and that's what you see. There was another part of your question.
About whether making the film was therapeutic. It's interesting, that question. I was just thinking in many ways, making any work is therapeutic, but that's not the only reason that one essays it. It's this breadcrumb trail I mentioned. It's this feeling of taking a conversation or a curiosity, taking something that one's curious about, and of course in collaboration, in fellowship with someone one really trusts and loves, and then following that conversation, keeping going with that curiosity, and then at a certain point leaving it. Maybe one's able to leave it because one's reached some kind of therapeutic catharsis. I don't know. But that's sort of, I think, how making all work is. It's sort of scratching one's own itch. I mean, I personally would find it very difficult to become involved in a project if I knew exactly what we were going to do. This feeling of not knowing is very important.
I mean, I think for myself, the catharsis has sort of crept up on me because my mother was alive when we shot the film, and I have, for many years since a child, dreaded the moment of her death. And so I've lived with that for a long time, like probably many of us here. But a particularly acute sense of this loss that will happen in the future. And then I made this film. It was almost like she had already gone, but she was still alive. And when she died, when we were editing, I I didn't cry, or I wasn't as distraught as I'd imagined I would be. And I think that was something to do with the piece of work that we had just done together.
Because we said things in the film, we kind of explored possibilities in the film that are really tough. There's this moment when Julie says, I didn't get it right. And that's a child's great fear. And if it's possible to, whatever that means, get it right, then, you know, you're blessed for the rest of your life. But I think that is a fear, not getting it right. And I think that's something we all know about. But for Joanna, I'd been there because my mother had already gone. But for Joanna to allow that to be spoken in the film was something that was my impulse to say, but she kept it in the film before her mother had gone, I think is extremely courageous and shows how serious-minded this project was, as just looking in all the corners and under all the carpets.
I am terribly sorry, but they came to tell me that they have a screening in the afternoon, and we need to wrap this.
We have a screening of our film.
Yes,
we have to go.
So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the film.
I thought you meant the festival had a screening.
Buongiorno a tutti, la conferenza stampa Il Signore delle Formiche. Vi presento subito gli ospiti al tavolo, che sono i produttori. Moreno Zani per Tender Stories, Simone Gattoni, Cavac Film, e Paolo Del Brocco, Rai Cinema. Gli interpreti: Anna Caterina Antonacci. Al mio fianco Sara Serraiocco, Leonardo Maltese, Elio Germano e Luigi Ocascio, e il regista Gianni Amelio. Lascio subito la parola alla platea, ai miei colleghi in platea. Alzate bene la mano. E io vorrei cominciare con una domanda per Gianni. Con quale spirito ti sei accostato a questa storia e hai deciso di raccontarla oggi?
Scusate, non voglio essere a tutti i costi quello che smonta anche la retorica di certe situazioni, perché la conferenza stampa bella è quella sincera, non è quella paludata. Io in genere faccio un film se qualcuno me lo offre, non perché lo penso io stando seduto da solo in una stanza spremendomi le meningi. No, io aspetto che mi chiamino. Ne ho diritto perché ho un'età. Allora, un giorno arriva una telefonata ed è di un grande regista, è di Marco Bellocchio, che mi invita nel suo ufficio di produzione che si chiama Cavac Film e che ha un solo difetto: sta sulla Nomentana. Io imploro: Gattoni, ti prego, vieni in Prati o trovami un quartino dalle tue parti. Allora vado e mi propongono un documentario su Aldo Braibanti. Io in precedenza avevo fatto un film e quindi mi consideravano uno specialista della materia, perché ho fatto un film che si chiama Felice chi è diverso. In occasione avevo chiamato Aldo e ci eravamo parlati tante volte per trovare il giorno giusto per andare io a trovarlo. Non stava bene, un giorno mi ha detto: Ferruccio, non lui, non si può fare questa cosa. Nel frattempo però io avevo trovato dei documenti, ma non eccezionali, riguardavano soprattutto, ma con una curiosità malsana, il suo interesse per le formiche, e poi basta. Ho detto grazie, non lo posso fare, non lo so fare, e ho rilanciato: perché non facciamo un film? Sono uscito, il giorno dopo, dove sei? Ricevo un'altra telefonata di un signore che avevo incontrato per la prima volta nell'ufficio Cavac, Simone Gattoni, che mi dice: ti va di venire di nuovo? Ma no, ha detto una cosa: ti paghiamo noi il taxi. Perché io uso i mezzi, no? E dico che io uso qualunque mezzo per arrivare, che ha anche un altro significato, diciamo. Io uso quello balordo, no? Allora Gattoni mi ricordo che mi ha detto: ti paghiamo noi il taxi. Allora sono andato e Gattoni e Bellocchio mi hanno detto: aggiudicato, facciamo un film. E io ho detto, te lo ricordi Simone, questo film si chiamerà Il Signore delle Formiche. Proprio subito sono partito dal titolo. Quindi mi hanno detto: ma con chi lo vuoi sceneggiare? E allora io ho detto: i grandi nomi zero, non li voglio, perché non esiste freschezza, non esiste novità, non esiste entusiasmo nei grandi nomi. E ho scelto due giovanissimi, per me professionalmente, sconosciuti dal punto di vista uno della sceneggiatura e l'altro totalmente sconosciuto. Sono presenti in prima fila Edoardo Petti, alzati Edoardo, scusa. Federico Pala, ovviamente fidandosi di me e soprattutto della mia esperienza sulla materia, vero Gattoni? Mi hanno detto vai, tanto la sai. Questa storia famosa della sai, poi te la racconto. Quindi abbiamo sceneggiato il film e durante la sceneggiatura, insomma, non è che si capisce tanto, soprattutto io non capisco niente mentre scrivo male, scrivo quello che mi capita di scrivere, perché tanto so che qualunque genialità metta sulla carta, poi la cambio. Però la sceneggiatura è piaciuta, vero? È piaciuta e il film è partito. Poi un giorno sono finite le riprese e poi mi taccio perché dico solo questo, che insomma c'è un'atmosfera anche bella quando si finiscono le riprese di un film in tempo, con 2 giorni di anticipo, e hanno chiesto discorso, con i brindisi, con gli spumanti, con i bicchieri, e io ho detto sono l'uomo più disperato del mondo. Basta. Vi ho gelato, Vi ho gelato, perché lo potrei ripetere anche oggi. Non sono felice, per niente. Scusami Luigi. Vi ho gelato, scusate. No. Cioè, capita di non essere felici. Io non sono felice. Il film sarà bellissimo, avrà il suo cammino, avrà il suo percorso, di cui io sono felice. Lo seguirò anche nell'ultima parrocchiale rimasta a Malta. Quindi do tutto quello che ho, tutto, come talento se ce l'ho e come entusiasmo e voglia di lavorare, però non sono felice. Vi auguro di essere più felici di me. A tutti.
Buongiorno, io volevo chiedere a Gianni Amelio, che so che forse eluderà in parte la domanda, ma forse no, quanto c'è di vero nel personaggio del cronista di Elio Germano e quanto sono vere le censure, e se veramente la madre di Braibanti si chiamava Susanna come la madre di Pasolini. Lo chiedo per pigrizia, per non fare ricerche, grazie.
Non credo che ti dovrei rispondere, perché ho ragione io. Quando si scrive si deve essere all'altezza del film che si guarda e non si offende il regista, non si scrive una cosa che poi si sa, perché tu sei un professionista da decenni, non si scrive dentro l'articolo una frase che si sa che finirà nel titolo, e il tuo titolo era infame, per cui scusami ma non ti rispondo. Scusate, certe libertà me le voglio togliere, ce l'ho, sono un uomo libero.
No, però non
mi dispiace. Guarda, ho cancellato il tuo numero e non voglio avere rapporti con te per la vita. Quindi
allora,
scusami, no, il tuo giornale faceva bene a mandare qualcun altro.
Io farei una domanda in attesa, però alzate le mani perché non ne vedo. Lì intanto farei una domanda a Luigi Locascio. Come ha trovato il suo Aldo Braibanti? Come si è preparato, come l'ha trovato e quali sono le caratteristiche, gli elementi di questa persona che ti interessava mettere in evidenza, ti interessava raccontare più di altre?
Ma io appunto non so se l'ho trovato, ma l'ho cercato con molta passione e continuo a cercarlo perché da certi punti di vista è stata una persona, è un personaggio, visto che è all'interno di un film, quindi dentro anche una sceneggiatura, enigmatico, nel senso che ha dei punti anche stranamente che sembrano in contrasto tra di loro. Il primo che mi viene in mente è la sproporzione che c'è tra la grandezza, tra la sicurezza, la certezza che ha all'interno del suo campo d'azione, che è quello dell'arte, quindi come regista, come scrittore, come poeta, come maestro anche. E invece d'altra parte le sue fragilità, il fatto di essere nelle cose dell'amore, cioè nel sentimento amoroso, nella relazione, ecco che subentra invece in lui un elemento di fragilità molto forte, la gelosia, appunto la perplessità sui comportamenti reciproci, eccetera. Quindi intanto questo elemento mi ha affascinato molto e poi ovviamente, per chi conosce la vicenda sarà più facile capire quello che intendo dire, appunto imputato per plagio e quindi un filosofo, un uomo che comunque ha una capacità di linguaggio molto forte, che ha delle idee molto chiare sulla propria innocenza, eppure si ritrova al momento cruciale, quando deve finalmente dire la sua e contrapporsi ai suoi persecutori, soprattutto inizialmente sceglie, diciamo, la strada del silenzio. Ecco, questo silenzio veramente enigmatico mi ha molto colpito e la ricerca delle motivazioni che potevano spingerlo a questa scelta mi hanno molto appassionato. Mi sono fatto un'idea, è un'interpretazione quella che do, fatta di tanti elementi, però ecco, più che altro erano queste le cose fondamentali.
Se permetti,
sì.
vorrei riprendere la parola, perché credo, che sia successo adesso lo stesso equivoco che è accaduto l'ultimo giorno di lavorazione del film. L'aggettivo che ho usato per me, infelice, molti allora l'hanno riferito al film, cioè che io non ero felice del film. Io del film sono non felice, ma di più. Forse è la cosa più bella che ho fatto, credo, forse. Sono faccende private, personali, me l'ha ricordato adesso attraverso le sue parole Luigi, vi chiamate Luigi tutti e due, ti sto guardando perché guardo te perché ho bisogno di parlare con te direttamente. Cioè, quando ho detto che sono infelice non mi riferivo al film e al mio rapporto col film. Io lo amo questo film, alla follia. Semplicemente può capitare che facendo un film si viva in un certo modo e ci siano delle fragilità che professionalmente io non ho, perché sono forte, umanamente non lo sono. E allora il lato che ha scoperto Luigi in Braibanti, io l'ho scoperto in me stesso. Io ho vissuto durante il film una storia d'amore molto tormentata, e questo tormento non passa. Forse il film si è giovato di questo mio sentimento. È probabile che se il film è bello lo si deve anche a questo, però voglio parlare in modo sincero, voglio parlare in modo diretto. Cioè, io ho scoperto le stesse fragilità di Aldo e questo forse ha giovato al film, ma non ha giovato a me. Ecco, chiariamo le cose. Paolo, Simone, io penso di aver dato il massimo con questo film e se non ho dato il massimo è perché ho dei limiti come regista, ma l'ho dato il massimo e amo questo film.
Allora.
Braibanti si è innamorato, io mi sono innamorato anch'io. Ecco, non mi è andata male come a Braibanti, non sono andato in galera, ma sono chiuso in un carcere mio. Va bene? Ecco, è chiara la situazione, Bettoni? Grazie.
Sì, allora, una domanda lì, poi arriviamo qui. Prego.
Buongiorno, sono Maria Lombardo della Sicilia. Ciao Gianni, ciao Luigi, complimenti, il film è molto emozionante, l'interpretazione di Luigi è straordinaria, forse è la sua migliore interpretazione, anche se sono tutte ottime le sue, anche quella di Elio, insomma di tutti, e della signora Antonacci che è soprano, che forse è la prima volta che lavora nel cinema, vero? Ecco. Allora, detto questo, naturalmente questo film, secondo me, ma penso secondo tutti, fa parte rientra perfettamente, anche se Gianni non l'hai scelto tu all'inizio di farlo, nel fil rouge della tua produzione, cioè questo affondare le mani nella sensibilità dei ragazzi, dei giovani, in quell'età della crescita e nel rapporto con l'adulto, che c'è in quasi tutti i tuoi film. Ecco, e volevo appunto chiederti se in questo ti riconosci, anche se non l'hai deciso tu. E poi a Elio Germano, che fa il giornalista, volevo chiedere su quella tela di fondo del PC e dell'unità, ecco, questo cambiamento di costume che allora neanche la sinistra italiana, alla quale neanche la sinistra era sensibile. E in situazioni che ancora oggi sono fortemente calde e che rischiano di precipitare nella nostra società, magari non con gli omosessuali ormai, però insomma con i diversi in generale.
Risponde prima Elio o prima io? Prima tu? Come vuoi?
Sì. Ma, diciamo penso che una delle sottotrame, il film parla di tante cose, ci parla di tante cose, no? Al di là della vicenda di Braibanti, o grazie a quella vicenda, insomma, respira di tante cose dell'epoca, ma soprattutto della nostra contemporaneità. E a ben vedere è anche un film che mette in contrapposizione la passione, no? Quello che succede a Braibanti, cioè viene definito plagio il suo amore, e di fatto viviamo in un'epoca in cui noi riconosciamo molto quanto la passione oggi sia sconveniente, cioè oggi è conveniente il profitto, i numeri, la finalità di un'azione, no? Chi fa il proprio lavoro anche con passione ha una vita più difficile di chi lo fa invece per arrivismo, per interesse personale, eccetera. Quindi ecco, nel mio personaggio si vive un po' questa contraddizione, che è una cosa molto contemporanea a mio avviso, o meglio lo è molto di più, cioè non si fa fatica oggi a riconoscersi nella precarietà di un lavoro che deve essere fatto in tutti i modi tranne che con passione, cioè soltanto obbedendo al principale, possibilmente sgomitando per calpestare i propri colleghi, in un'ottica soltanto di scalata sociale, di arrivismo, di non appunto di sentire che il proprio mestiere è un modo di contribuire alla collettività. Quindi ecco, in questo senso la trasvalutazione di morale che c'è stata riguarda tutti, ovviamente non solo il mestiere di giornalista, e è una delle corresponsabili del decadimento culturale e qualitativo del nostro paese.
Il pulsante.
Diciamo che hai colto nel segno facendo quell'osservazione, era più una considerazione che una domanda, no? È chiaro davanti a tutti, sciorinando i titoli dei film che ho fatto, che c'è sempre lo scontro, l'incontro tra due generazioni, sempre, sempre. Questo è cominciato in un film che nessuno di voi ha visto, lo giuro. Ero ragazzo, 27 anni, ho fatto La città del sole, che era un film su un filosofo, Tommaso Campanella, e io ho sentito il bisogno di mettergli di fronte un contadinello ignorante, lui un filosofo, l'altro un ignorante, e via discorrendo da colpire al cuore fino ad Hammamet, dove qualcuno, abbagliato dalla bravura sovrumana di Favino, ha dimenticato di leggere il film. E il film non è solo il personaggio del presidente, ma è lo scontro, incontro, scontro con il ragazzo Fausto. Quindi in tutti i miei film c'è quella verità che diceva Maria. E anche in questo, probabilmente anche trascinato da quello che non considero un ragazzo di grande talento, ma considero un miracolo. Cioè, anche nei film accadono i miracoli. Ecco, il mio miracolo è trascinato da lui e dal suo talento e soprattutto da come loro due si guardavano fin dal primo giorno. Ho costruito qualcosa che non è, diciamo, che non ci si aspetterebbe da un film che sarà etichettato sul caso Braibanti. In realtà è limitativo dire di questo film è un film sul caso Braibanti, no, è una grandissima storia d'amore tra un uomo e un ragazzo. Autobiografica, molto autobiografica.
Allora, prima della domanda, a questo punto chiederei a Leonardo, che è al suo primo film, ecco, che cosa è stata questa esperienza? Anche a te, come hai fatto delle ricerche personali, come hai cercato di comprendere questo personaggio e quindi restituirlo al pubblico?
Grazie. Sì. Questa è, per me è la prima esperienza cinematografica e devo dire che mi sono sentito benissimo. La mia vita è cambiata da quando è iniziato il set e ho avuto la fortuna di trovarmi circondato da persone che mi hanno veramente fatto sentire al sicuro, a partire appunto dal regista, da Gianni Amelio, che mi ha guidato e mi ha dato soprattutto fiducia, che è una cosa molto importante e molto rara oggigiorno da trovare, e poi anche e soprattutto con gli altri attori, con Luigi. Io ho imparato tantissimo semplicemente osservando qualunque cosa facesse mentre era sul set, era veramente una cosa incredibile. E per quanto riguarda il personaggio di Ettore, sono andato a fare delle ricerche ovviamente sulla storia, ma anche lì, come diceva Gianni, oltre che una storia riguardo il caso Braibanti, è una vera e propria storia d'amore, e quindi ho tirato fuori il personaggio semplicemente dalla sceneggiatura e dalle battute, era tutto scritto lì, e dalle interazioni che ci avevano Braibanti ed Ettore, lì secondo me c'era tutto. Io ho fatto del mio meglio per dargli giustizia.
Grazie. Allora, prego.
Al regista, a un certo punto appare Emma Bonino, ma è l'Emma Bonino di oggi, non dei tempi nel momento in cui ha girato il film e raccontato la storia. Perché questa scelta, se c'è un legame con qualcuno dei personaggi, e se ci può dare una spiegazione? Grazie.
Ho saputo da Emma Bonino che lei nel 68 non faceva assolutamente parte del Partito Radicale. Lei è entrata dopo E infatti mi ha chiesto: ma come mai vuole me come testimone di un periodo, quando potrebbe prendere un sosia giovane di Pannella? E io mi sono messo a ridere, lei ha riso pure, e ho detto: vorrei raccontare la battaglia forte che i radicali hanno fatto per Braibanti e per la società italiana, perché è stato il partito che si è esposto di più, che ha avuto più coraggio, e il Partito Radicale è stato il partito che ha fatto cancellare nel 1981 il famigerato reato di plagio. Allora volevo rendere omaggio al Partito Radicale e mi sembrava che fosse più degno vedere Emma Bonino come oggi che non invece una comparsa qualunque che facesse il sosia di Pannella. Tutto qua.
Sara e Anna Caterina, i personaggi femminili di questo film sono molto importanti e rappresentano un punto di vista forte. E vorrei cominciare con Anna Caterina chiedendo intanto, ecco, la sua prima esperienza come attrice, viene dal mondo della musica, che cosa è stata questa esperienza e che cosa le ha regalato questo personaggio?
È la mia prima esperienza dopo 40 anni di carriera come cantante. Gianni e Edoardo hanno voluto propormi questo ruolo in modo del tutto inaspettato per me, e io ho seguito con entusiasmo, forse anche con incoscienza, questa proposta. È stata un'esperienza che veramente ha cambiato in effetti la mia vita, perché è completamente diversa dal lavoro che si fa in teatro e nel teatro musicale. Aspetto stasera di vedere se è stata una buona scelta, non per il film, per la mia personale interpretazione. No, ma sto scherzando, in realtà ho avuto molta paura, ma mi hanno rassicurato sul fatto che sono guardabile. È stata una grandissima esperienza lavorare con tutti loro, come ha detto Leonardo, anche per me. Il personaggio, a differenza dei personaggi dei negativi dell'opera, diciamo, è un personaggio senza scuse, senza luce. Io ho fatto anche delle Medee cercando di giustificare Medea, e invece questa non è giustificabile, però mi è piaciuto proprio questo l'ottusità totale e senza luce di questa donna che decide di sacrificare, di distruggere il proprio figlio pur di non lasciarlo alla sua scelta di anormalità. Quindi insomma ho voluto sostenere comunque la negatività di questa donna meglio che ho potuto.
Sara, il tuo personaggio... Sì.
Volevo aggiungere, per dare a Cesare quel che è di Cesare, che è stato Edoardo Petti a consigliarmi Anna Caterina Antonacci. Ha insistito molto e io poi ho conosciuto Anna Caterina e l'ho trovata perfetta.
Grazie.
E quindi siamo qua. Grazie.
Il tuo personaggio è uno di quei giovani che in quegli anni cominciavano a capire la necessità del cambiamento, no? Quindi poi arriva sulle barricate, diciamo così. Cosa è stato per te incontrare il tuo personaggio?
Innanzitutto volevo ringraziare il maestro Gianni Amelio per avermi dato questa grande opportunità. È un piacere per me essere qui e far parte di questo film fatto da attori immensi. Graziella è un personaggio sensibile, forte, allo stesso tempo deciso, una ragazza degli ideali forti, che nel suo piccolo cerca di sensibilizzare l'opinione pubblica attraverso comizi, rivolte studentesche. Ho avuto maggiore interazione con Elio Germano, che interpreta Ennio, mio cugino nel film, e abbiamo avuto modo di stare sul set e di creare una grande empatia tra di noi, e io penso che questa storia sia importante dal punto di vista appunto dell'opinione collettiva, perché il controverso reato di plagio poi cela una condanna all'omosessualità e niente.
Grazie. Purtroppo dobbiamo fermarci qui, mi dispiace molto, ma il tempo a nostra disposizione è finito.
Non rispondo alle tue domande e non ti ascolto. Grazie. Ho già dato tutto, ho già detto tutto al tuo giornale. Domanda, fai un po' di domande al tuo giornale.
Possiamo dare un attimo il microfono? Possiamo dare il microfono un attimo qui?
Un'altra conferenza stampa, scusate.
Dobbiamo andare, ragazzi.
Solo un minuto.
Un saluto a Gianni, siamo amici, sono Franco Grillini, presidente onorario Gay, direttore di Gay News, e ci siamo sentiti con Gianni anche prima. Oltretutto volevo dirgli una cosa che non gli avevo detto: io sono nato a Bologna in un posto che si chiama Monte delle Formiche, quindi insomma diciamo che con Braibanti c'è da questo punto di vista un filo rosso. Volevo velocissimamente dire questo: sono felice che tu abbia voluto raccontare una storia d'amore che funzioni. I miei amici avevano le lacrime agli occhi. Prima, quando abbiamo finito di vedere il film, ti volevo dire che, a differenza di quello che ha affermato la collega prima, nel film viene fuori bene questa persecuzione di Stato che c'era col fascismo quando gli omosessuali venivano mandati al confine, è proseguita dopo con l'ordine alle questure di portare in carcere le persone che si incontravano di notte. Paolo Poli mi raccontava che ha passato una notte in questura a Bologna perché era stato preso su da una volante alla Montagnola a Bologna, dove si trovavano gli omosessuali. Quindi questa persecuzione c'era. Braibanti è stato l'epifenomeno. Ti ringrazio per averlo raccontato bene in questo film, ma è proseguita anche dopo e c'è tuttora. Non è vero che è stata risolta la questione omosessuale in Italia. Prova ne sia quello schifoso applauso che abbiamo visto in Senato con la bocciatura della legge Zan.
Dobbiamo chiudere.
Grazie Gianni.
Buongiorno, grazie di essere venuti alla conferenza stampa del film fuori concorso Dead for a Dollar. Prima di cominciare vi presento gli ospiti al tavolo a partire dalla mia destra in fondo. L'attore Benjamin Bratt. E il regista del film Walter Hill. I'm going to start with before opening to the public, I'm just going to start with a very simple question to Walter. Walter, what is it about the moral universe of the Western that brings you back to that place so often in your work?
Well, I'm tempted to say I don't know, because you have to know yourself, and does anybody ever? One of the great questions of life, I guess. I'm fond of the period. I like making the films. I like going out there with the cast and the horses, and the country is usually beautiful, and I think there's a nostalgia for a certain period in American history that we all share, the world shares. There's a mythopoetic idea about the Western, and it's now transferred cultures. This, of all countries, understands that, I believe. So, yeah, they're fun to make. I guess it goes down to that.
There's a question here.
Congratulations, everyone, and Stephen Schaefer for the Boston Herald. Walter, I wonder if the movie that you've made, the Western that we're seeing here in Venice, is it any different? Has it mutated at all from the Westerns that were Hollywood's bread and butter in the 1950s? And for Rachel, Westerns have always had strong female figures. Can you talk about what attracted you about this movie and the role? Thank you.
Okay. I think I've forgotten the question.
The question was if there is a difference between this Western we're seeing of yours that we're seeing today and the Western we're made in the 50s.
Clearly the attitudes about the feminine position in society and racial attitudes are clearly, I think, different than the traditional tropes of the Western. At the same time, the movie tries to valorize the tradition of the Western, and many of the... I didn't want to make a film that was frozen in amber, just like the 1950s or something, or the 1930s, but I thought it should have some modern relevance. So it was kind of bifurcated, or self-contradictory, if you will. And, but it was an attempt. I mean, you know, you take some chances.
Rachel?
Well, I had a really fantastic conversation with Walter when he first told me about the project and the script, and his desire to push at some of the boundaries of the traditional Western space and add something to the canon that respected its history and also expanded on a number of those tropes. And great stories start with great characters, and so for me, this character of Rachel, and particularly this speech that she gives at the center, which I found so interesting because it was both an opportunity for her to be vulnerable, but also manipulative and vulnerable by choice, and it felt like something that I hadn't quite seen explored in this space before.
There's a question here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. A question from Tenerife, Canary Islands, Spain. I would like to congratulate Mr. Walter Hill, a very beautiful movie, well directed. Congrats for all the characters, all the actors. And I have two questions for Walter and a question for all the actors and the actors, if you are so kind. For Walter, I would like to ask you for the Greek quote, Helen of Troy. The Greek thing is very present in your films, the warriors, Xenophon. I would like you to explain something about that, if you want to. The Cowboy Iliad, okay, the epic poem.
You know the Cowboy Iliad.
Yeah, I perfectly know.
I thought there was only 10
it's very
people
beautiful,
in the world.
But I would like you to tell something about that. And the film is dedicated to Bud Boddicker, the film director.
Yes.
I would like to know if it's an admiration, if an influence, something like that. And for the actors, how do you feel being directed by Walter Hill? All of you, Willem Dafoe, you know, you have the experience back in the 80s, but how is being directed by Walter Hill? Thank you very much.
Maybe I should leave for that part. Bud Boddicker and I were friendly. I've much admired his movies. And as I was finishing this movie in post-production, I thought, you know, I think Bud would have liked this movie. And the reason I think he would have liked it is it's kind of like his. So, and I thought I would, I also get angry that I think Bud isn't mentioned enough when people talk about the history of good Westerns. or great Westerns. And he went out there with tiny schedules and low budgets, and he made some really terrific films. So, and I was, as I say, I was privileged to know him, and he was very friendly with me. What was the rest of it?
Helen of Troy.
Oh, Helen of Troy. Well, I don't know. I've made 2 or 3 movies where someone's looking for a lost, a woman that's been abducted or lost. People ask me, well, isn't this kind of the premise of Richard Brooks's movie, The Professionals? And I say, well, yeah, I think so. But it's also the premise of the Iliad, and I think Homer beat both Richard and I to it, and it's part of our culture, the idea, and so, hey, we're all connected.
And to the actors now, how does it feel to work in a movie? The question was with Walter Hill. Is that what you asked, right? Yeah.
Walter, that's a great one.
Okay, there. Walter, you should, in fact, leave the room. Walter's a living legend. I enjoyed every moment working with him. My only complaint is I wish there was more to do. I wish there was more time on the set. I mean, on any film, when you show up and you have a collective of artists, you all want to do your best work. But the thing that you're fighting against is money and time. And this was a smaller independent film, and there wasn't a lot of time. And we hope the result is enjoyable and entertaining. I grew up as a boy. I grew up a huge fan of the Western genre and a big fan of Walter's. And what I really loved about the script is that he allows everyone to be who they are in the film without judgment. Someone asked me backstage, what is it like to play the villain? I don't see Tiberio Vargas as a villain. He's certainly an antagonist, but he's true to who he is, just as everyone else in the film is. And I think that gives it a sense of kind of authenticity, even within the genre that it is.
You. Yeah.
I worked with Walter, I guess 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago, in a film called Streets of Fire. It was my first studio film, so I guess Walter got me started, really. I had a wonderful time. He gave me fun things to do. He has such a beautiful film culture. He's so smart about things, but he doesn't wear it on his sleeve. He's very direct. And when he said he wanted to do Western, a genre that, you know, he loves, all of his movies are Westerns, basically. So I thought, yeah, I'm in. And I know Christoph was involved. So 40 years later, he's basically the same guy. I'm basically the same guy. So I had a wonderful time on this.
Yeah, this is my first time working with Walter, and I'm not yet 40 years old, but I hope to get to again. Sorry.
That's okay. It is what it is.
No, it was really fantastic from our very first conversation. I feel like Walter's a really generous director who demands excellence, but in a really quiet way, and in a way that's so respectful to every single other person involved in a film's craft. And I just found the entire experience inspiring between working with Walter, who as I said, you know, demands excellence, but also makes space for actors who have done their homework to, you know, to show up and do the work, and to be able to work alongside these guys who I've admired for a really long time. It was an incredible experience.
I didn't like it.
No, I mean, what can I say after this? You know, just add more. I mean, you caught the drift. This is how it was.
Let's see.
And and yes, to everything, and a little more, but that would be boring.
Speaking of Homer, Walter made a statement saying that when he cast you, Christoph, he knew that the character would not be Achilles; it would be an Odysseus. Do you agree? It's an unseen Christoph Waltz in this movie. It's a very special performance. I haven't seen this character played by you before.
I hope there is, because that's all I've got. Walter showed me it was in the first draft, and then we talked about it. It's not really a complicated process. It's a complex one, but it's not really complicated. You talk to the master talks to the apprentice, and sooner or later the apprentice becomes a fellow, a journeyman, and then off you go.
There's a question there.
Hello, Maestro Mazzetto. I have a question for Walter Hill. It's about the soundtrack. How do you work on it? Do you take inspiration from other Western, or do you create something different?
No, I try to keep everything to the task at hand. I thought that, and you understand about your own film, that there are problems. Ours is a small film. So I said, the first thing I said was make it bigger. And the second thing I said was make us in Mexico. We're not really in Mexico. We have to tell the audience we're in Mexico. And I'm not sophisticated about music. I always start out the same way with the composer. I don't know about music, but I know about the film. And I know what I think finally is going to work. And then I think really the composer is another actor. And you want to give them room, and you want to give them space to see what they bring to you. And we found a very young man. He looks about 17. He's actually about 25, I think, named Xander Rodzinski. He's a protege of James Newton Howard's, and this was his first big opportunity. And I think he seized the moment.
You said that this film is not big, it's a small film, but the film doesn't look small at all, and it has a wonderful sense of space and geography. Can you, and it's very important, the geography in it. Can you talk a little bit about that design?
Well, those are my tricks. Well, we were in Santa Fe, and there's a lot of countryside out there. And if you plan your shots carefully, you can get a sense of, there is a sense of size, but the movie was made very quickly. And
how many days?
It was really amounts to 25 shooting days. It took us 30 days, I think, to shoot 25 days. We had COVID problems, we had weather problems. So we had like 25 full shooting days. And that we had to move it along. I was lucky I had such a good cast. They all showed up prepared, and there wasn't any argy-bargy. We went out and did it, shot the scenes. No particular staging problems, other than you're always fighting the light and the countryside and all that kind of business. But that's picture making.
There's a question there.
Hello, I want to ask a question to Walter Hill about your way of shooting on Western. When you directed Long Riders, your style was more epic with the use of ralenti, and
Use of what?
Ralenti, slow motion, slow.
Yeah, slow motion. And so you were more epic. And by step with Geronimo and Wild Bill, and now with Death for $1, you are now more classic, more concise, more laced up. Can you tell us something about this evolution?
I'm smarter now.
Okay.
And a lot of it has to do with, what's the Marxian phrase? Means of production. We didn't have a crane. We didn't have, it was almost impossible to make a dolly shot. I don't think I've ever panned so much to give it a sense of size and setting. And so you'll notice there's a very liberal use of panning introductions to scenes in the hope to kind of get a little more movement and size into it. But again, finance and time have a lot to do. You really have to make yourself, the way I wanted to shoot the movie originally, we couldn't in the end have the cameras to do it. I wanted to shoot it all handheld and make it very immediate. And we had to abandon that idea, the cameraman and I. Lloyd and I have worked together a number of times and have the scars to prove it. We bicker, but we love each other. And so anyway, you adapt to the circumstances, and then when it's all done, they kind of look like your other movies somehow. So there you go.
There's a question here.
Hello, thank you for the movie. It's also visually stunning apart from everything else. I've got possible two questions. The first is a small one, actually a follow-up to what Mr. Hill just said. The choice to make it all in this color, how was it made? And it gives really a specific atmosphere, this yellowish coloring. Yeah, so it's the technical one. And about the characters of Mr. Waltz and Mr. Defoe, did they have a choice actually of not being eternal enemies, and finishing it and starting anew, as was suggested, or it's such a classical rivalry that it cannot be finished without one of the rivals dying? Thank you.
I think the first one was to you, and it was about the use of the sepia tones and the sand tones.
The movie takes place in New Mexico territory and Mexico, American Southwest, and anytime you spend there, the sun is pervasive. So I was trying to get that feeling of not necessarily oppressive, but constant bright sunlight being part of the mix. And it seemed appropriate, especially for the Mexican section of the movie, which has got to be 3/4, 5/6 of the movie, I guess. So it was simply, again, adapting your tools to the story at hand.
It's a good clue. I love your story. It's beautiful. It's just not ours. That's all there I can say. You know, the story at hand is what we dealt with.
Okay. No, the only thing I say, if I understood your question or your comment correctly, of course they have to have a showdown. And I like it so much because both of them do sort of horrible things, but they do keep their word. And that's, right, that's in a great Western tradition.
Well, I have a follow-up to our question, and it's for Walter. Walter, your characters are defined by their choices, and in this film is so precise, you know, so their destiny cannot be different because of the choices they make. Is that correct?
Well, I think there's one of the things about Westerns is that the endings are foretold. They are not trick and surprise endings. They deal with dramatic inevitability. And I think, therefore, I mean, I'm agreeing with you that the drama demands a final confrontation between these two people, even though, and what we try to do that made it a little different is give the other fella an out. But they're both bound by their codes and conventions. I always say that every good story ends with a tear, even a comedy. And this is I'd like to think a positive story and a positive movie, but it has a very melancholy ending. And there is a sadness when you see Willem's character pass from the scene. And to add to the melancholy, we, in the little epigraphs at the end of the movie, talk about where the characters go and where they end, reminding everybody that we're all mortal. So I don't know if that quite answers it, but...
There's a question here that she's been waiting for a little.
Buongiorno. Volevo ricordare che anche dei apparentemente piccoli film come quelli di Sergio Leone della trilogia del dollaro poi si rivelarono dei grandissimi film. E siccome oggi presentano anche un documentario...
Vado piano che così sentono la traduzione.
E quindi oggi si presenta anche un documentario su Sergio Leone, su quel tipo di western che ha fatto la storia. La domanda è questa. Alcune citazioni, mi pare di sentirle anche nella colonna sonora, si sente qualche eco di Morricone. Volevo sapere se ha fatto qualche omaggio magari a Leone, se l'ha mai conosciuto, se, come dire, questi film hanno fatto parte anche delle sue passioni e anche agli attori. Che rapporto hanno con questo tipo di film? Grazie.
She said for the actors, too.
No, it's, I think anche per gli attori, for everyone, yeah.
Well, listen, the films of Leone and Leone/Morricone are now the property of the world. They're terribly important in the history of not only the Western, but the history of the cinema. To say that, you know, there are certain directors, storytellers with film, that are beyond, you can't copy them. You can't, Buñuel is a good example, that his films are inimitable. There are other directors who contribute to the kind of collective conscience of the cinema, and they are much imitated. Kurosawa was much imitated. John Ford was much imitated. And Leone is one of the real classic examples of what he gave has been picked up and used by many. We all kind of work joined hands. We're on each other's shoulders. We're all connected. You can't separate your work totally from work that came before. when I was a young director, those many years ago, they said, well, he was very influenced by Peckinpah. And they always said about Peckinpah, he was very influenced by Kurosawa. It's true. And they said about Kurosawa, he's very influenced by John Ford. It's true. And they said about John Ford, he was very influenced by Griffith. True. And you can clearly see in D.W. Griffith the influence of Charles Dickens. None of us stand apart. We're all in this together, and we all work out our own personality within a larger framework. And Sergio was a great part of that. And did I meet him? I shook hands with him a couple of times, and I listened to one of his press conferences, which was mainly a monologue. And he was a very imposing fellow, I'll say that.
Does anyone among the actors want to add something about Leone? Or Leone, I think the question was also for you guys.
I just got hurt feelings when I remember Last Temptation of Christ was here, and he came out in the press saying, "This is not the face of our Lord, this is the face of Satan." I liked his movies, but then after that, I don't know.
La signora con la maglia gialla che è un po' che aspetta.
So congratulations again, Walter. In our interview, this was like almost 20 years ago in San Jose at the CineQuest, and then you mentioned Samuel Johnson, a poet, English poet. I was just wondering if you still live with this philosophy, and also for other actors and for the team, when do we plan to see this film in the United States?
Well, I'm told that I'm being given an award tonight, and they told me to prepare a tiny speech. And in the tiny speech, I will quote Samuel Johnson, so he's still with me.
Don't give away the speech. And about the release of the film is what, September 20th? I think
the movie comes out in America September 30, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Una domanda là in fondo.
All the publicists just had a heart attack.
Good morning. Good morning. Question for Mr. Hill. Where did you draw the inspiration for these movies, for all your movies, and the feelings about directing those wonderful actors? Thank you.
You mean the choice of actors? Okay.
Shall we leave the room?
Well,
yes.
I'm trying to figure out how to answer it quickly, and I don't think I can. I was interested in reading the history of the West. There was a real fellow named Chris Madsen, who was born in Denmark. He immigrated to the United States. He fought in the Danish-Prussian War. He then joined the French Foreign Legion. He then immigrated to America. He joined the American Army. He was an Indian Scout in the West, and then he became a lawman and a bounty hunter. And I thought this was an interesting beginning to an idea, because our conceptions of bounty hunter is usually some big, strong Anglo-Saxon type fellow, and that's the way we had always seen it. Now, this story really has nothing to do with any incident in Chris Madsen's life, but Madsen was the origin of Max Borland. Now, if you're searching around to figure out who could play Max Borland, the list is fairly short, and I happen to be friendly with a wonderful actor, and I think I finessed him into reading it, and he was kind enough to call me about a day later and say he liked the script, and he stuck with it. The movie would not have been made had he not stuck with us for month after month after month, trying to get this thing together, and indeed was one of the producers on it. So.
Who isn't?
Can you talk about the casting Rachel?
Well, Rachel was the, and we, like all these movies, they go from crisis to crisis. We thought we all had enough money, and they said, no, no.
And I'm the latest one.
You know, and at the last second, we still hadn't cast the part. And Ray Middleton, a very fine casting director, I can't really remember the conversation. And this, who first said her name, but Lorraine said she could get the script to Rachel, and and Lorraine said, and we can get a quick answer, which was very important at that time, because we were teetering on financial balance. And so we sent the script, and I believe 2 days later, I had a phone call with Rachel. She was, I believe, speeding down a freeway while we were talking.
I was like hiding on a street corner, actually.
And you should take it from there. So.
Oh, I don't know what you were thinking. No, we had a really wonderful conversation, I think, which I said earlier, that Walter talked about the part, and you know, you made it clear that you were very open to a certain amount of collaboration in terms of, you know, what we might find together, and it was a very quick turnaround. We finished shooting on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel in New York, and then a couple weeks later we're out in Santa Fe, and Walter had warned that it would be fast and furious, but was really generous with his time in terms of making sure that we could get there together.
There's time for one there. See.
Thank you, everyone. When I came to see the film today, I was not a huge fan of the Western, and following the screening, I actually want to explore it a bit more, so thank you about that. We opened with the changing evolution of the genre, right, in terms of the inclusion and representation of women or of race, but at a time when, and this is not a criticism by any means, but at a time when gun violence and cultural violence is a growing issue, how do you deal with that in when you're making a film where violence is so baked into the genre, or when it's even based on a true story where violence occurred? Is that something that, as a filmmaker, Mr. Hill, or as actors, was that a conflict at all, or a conversation?
No, I don't look at things that way. If you say gun violence, and we're talking about random violence, it's a terrible thing. I don't think that any film I've ever done advocates anything like that. It's easy to condemn the use of force, but it was the use of force and guns that freed the slaves. It was the use of guns and force that liberated the Nazi camps. It's really about purpose and the idea behind it. We all condemn these terrible things that happen at schools or supermarkets or something like that. I think the issue really is the availability, not the use.
I would say the violence in the film is just representative of the genre, and I'm sure it's more or less what it was like. Death and violence comes shockingly quick and sudden and out of nowhere, and then it's over. And that's sort of how it plays out in the film.
The last one, I think, because we're running out of time.
Thank you. KJ Matthews, HFPA. You guys have already talked about how wonderful it was to work with Mr. Hill, obviously all the great things.
I didn't.
Be honest now. Talk to me about the challenging part about working with him on set. I'd like to hear about that.
You're on, kid.
I'm a strong. No, I'm not a strong believer. I'm more than that. I'm 100% convinced that discipline is the starting point for everything. Discipline in thinking, discipline in action, and you know what? Discipline in emoting, especially if you do it sort of at the spur of the moment and the request of a film script. And it's kind of considered now old style. I don't think it's old style. I think it's the very foundation of our discourse, our, everyday communicating to each other. And why would it be different on a movie set? And the idea that a movie set is there to make us feel good is erroneous, to be polite. Walter is of the same conviction. And that's what's absolutely fabulous. But discipline, yes, is sometimes a challenge. Sorry. It's not always about how we feel. It's sometimes about what we need to do.
And on this note, we have to close because we ran out of time. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Walter, for the film. And
Yes, sir.